Okay, so I didn't really expect this novel to be as great as it turned out to be. This is definitely one of the best novels that I've read so far this year. I don't mean to exaggerate, but this novel, especially the prose, is just really top-notch. And it's amazing, the fact that this was only Cormac McCarthy's second novel, and he already showed that he knew what he was doing. But before we talk about the good stuff that this novel has even further, let's talk about the synopsis first. Okay, so Outer Dark is essentially a tale about a brother and a sister who had this relationship. Yep. And when the baby is born, the brother decides to take the baby away when his sister is asleep and leaves the baby in the woods, hoping that it will die. When he returns, he basically lies to his sister, saying that the baby died of natural causes. But of course, the lie doesn't last that long, and the sister soon enough finds out that her brother actually lied to her. And because of that, she decides to set forth alone to find her baby and bring him back. And oh yeah, there were also 3 elusive and terrifying strangers that also wreak havoc at the same time. Okay, so the prose in this novel is just beautiful and it's vivid. And I really admire the way Cormac McCarthy is able to describe things in details, but also in an interesting way. Because there are so many authors out there that can describe things in details, but in my opinion, only some of them that can actually make it interesting and quite rewarding. Because, if you decide to be descriptive, you kind of force your readers to slow down, so that your readers can digest everything that's mentioned in that part. And unfortunately, not all of them are, rewarding. Sometimes being too descriptive can be quite boring, but that's definitely not the case with Cormac McCarthy's Outer Dark. And I'm just going to mention some of my favorites. And as he lay there, a far crack of lightning went bluey down the sky and bequeathed him in an embryonic bird's first fissured vision of the world, and transpiring instant and outrageous from dark to dark, a final view of the grotto and the shapeless white plasm struggling upon the rich and incunabular moss like a langed swamp hare. Next, it howled execration upon the dim Camarine world of its nativity, wail on wail, while he lay there gibbering with palsied jaw hasps, his hands putting back the night like some witless paraclete, beleaguered with all limbo's clamor. And lastly, he stood in the center of the square where the tracks of commerce lay fossilized in dried mud all about him, turning an amphitheatrical figure in that moon-wrought waste manacled to a shadow that struggled grossly in the dust. And so yeah, those are some of my favorite sentences in this novel, and there are actually a lot of them. Cormac McCarthy really shows that he is in command of his medium. This novel also shows that Cormac McCarthy has the ability to write engaging, witty, and also intense dialogues. Some of the dialogues in this novel actually remind me of the coin toss scene in No Country for Old Men, because you realize that something is a little off, that something is not right, but unfortunately it's never addressed directly what it is that is wrong. So you just kind of hold your breath and hope that no harm will be done to your characters. Okay, so the next interesting thing about this novel is actually the title itself, which is Outer Dark, a phrase that is actually used in the Bible, specifically in the Gospel of Matthew 3 times. Okay, so the phrase Outer Dark is first used in Matthew chapter 8, specifically in verse 12. And just for some context, it is used when Jesus meets this centurion, which is basically a Roman soldier, who asks Jesus to heal his servant, but the soldier just says that, you don't have to go to my place, just say it and my servant will be healed. And Jesus really admires the soldier's faith. And in addition to that, he also says, "And I say unto you that many shall come from the east and west, and shall sit down with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the children of the kingdom shall be cast out into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth." And it is used again in Matthew chapter 22 from verse 2 until 14, specifically in verse 13. So this time Jesus talks about a parable, and the parable is about a king who wants to arrange a marriage for his son. But unfortunately, the first people whom he invites reject the invitation and actually just kill the messengers. And of course, the king becomes outraged and orders his soldiers to kill all of those people. But since the wedding banquet is already there, everything is already prepared, the show must go on. So the king basically asks his servants to invite all the people whom they meet on the street. Sadly, one of the guests doesn't wear a wedding garment. And the king is pretty much upset by this, so much so that he said unto him, Friend, how camest thou in hither not having a wedding garment? And he was speechless. Then said the king to the servants, Bind him hand and foot, and take him away, and cast him into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And lastly, it is used in Matthew chapter 25 from verse 14 till 30, specifically in verse 30. And this time, Jesus also talks about a parable. And this time it's about a man who wants to go on a journey. But before he goes on his journey, he leaves some talents for his servants, and he also expects them to do something with the talents that they've been given and make profits. Unfortunately, one of the servants decides to just hide the talents and do nothing about it. And of course, when the man comes back home and finds that out, he becomes pissed. And he basically says, Take therefore the talent from him, and give it unto him which had 10 talents. For unto everyone that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. And cast ye the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So in the first one, in the meeting between Jesus and the centurion, Jesus, you can say, wants to address the fact that we also need to have faith. It's not enough to just be a good person. We also need to have faith in God. And in the second one, the parable of the wedding banquet, although it's a little harsh, there's this just one person who doesn't wear a wedding garment, and then suddenly that person is thrown out into hell. I guess this part actually means that Jesus wants us to live accordingly, to live up to God's standard. It is difficult, it's not easy, but we have to try our best. And in the last one, in the parables of the talents, here you can say that Jesus expects us to do something with the lives that have been given to us. He expects us not to waste it, or probably even worse, let it end because we want it to end. But unfortunately, our main characters, the sister and the brother, Rinthi and Kala, don't have any of these traits. And at first, they just, stay at their house, kind of safe and sound, and also, safe from danger and harm. But even worse than that, they also commit one of the most horrible sins imaginable. And because of that, now they are thrusted out into the outer darkness, where they also suffer, they are also in pain. Their life basically become more miserable. And in addition to that, they also witness some of the most horrifying things that they have ever witnessed in their lives. So you might ask, is that it? Is that what the novel is entirely about? Is the novel just about two characters who can live up to God's standard and then thrown into the outer darkness, or cast out into hell, basically? In my opinion, I think it's a little more than that. Because although Jesus seems harsh in the 3 chapters that I mentioned earlier, we need to remember that God is also not without mercy. But it really depends on us whether we want it or not. And I guess this is what the novel means, at least to me. In my opinion, this novel centers around sin and what our characters do about their sin. On one hand, we have Kala, the brother, who decides to just bury his sin, and just sweep it under the rug and hopes that no one knows about it. But unfortunately, his life doesn't get better. In fact, he becomes more miserable, he gets himself into more trouble, and slowly but surely, he also loses his way. And on the other side, we have the sister, Rinthi, who in my opinion is actually also sinful, although maybe not as sinful as her brother. And the reason for this is because the book never makes it clear whether their relationship was consensual or not. But had it not been consensual, I guess Rinthi would have tried to get away from her brother, but she didn't do so. She only does so when she finds out that her brother actually lied to her. So I think it's pretty much safe to say that she is also sinful. But unlike her brother, she decides to do something. She goes out into the outer darkness and tries to find her baby and bring him home. And a couple of times in the novel, she says that's mine. Like, that baby is mine and I want it back. I want to bring him back home. And she doesn't really care what she has to do to get that baby back. She just wants her baby. Some people might see this as a strong sense of motherhood that Rinthi has, which I also agree. But I think it can also be seen as a way of her saying that it is my sin. I know that it is not right. I know that it is terrible, but let me own it. Let me do something about it. So you can kind of say that she wants to redeem herself by trying to find her baby. But do all of her endeavors turn out to be fruitful? Does she manage to get her baby back? Well, honestly, you just have to read the novel to find out. And right now, I would like to talk something that always fascinates me about McCarthy's novels. Although his novels tend to be bleak, dark, and seem to be hopeless, there is always a little bit of goodness in his novels. And in my opinion, that's also the case with Outer Dark. For examples, some of the strangers in these novels are actually kind. Those 3 terrifying strangers that I mentioned earlier still exist. They wreak havoc. They also, do more than just horrible things. But there are also strangers that are actually willing to help our main characters. Some of them actually give our main characters food, shelter, water, and even jobs. So, although the title of the book is Outer Dark, the world outside in this novel doesn't seem to be that dark. And in a way, in my opinion, it is more realistic, because we can all be as pessimistic as we want to be, but we can't just deny the fact that there is a little bit of goodness in the world, and maybe sometimes so much more. And I know that some people might say that I'm a little too optimistic when it comes to understanding Cormac McCarthy's work. And to that I say, no, I don't want to try to be too optimistic, because I do fully realize that his novels are not the most cheerful novels, but in my opinion, it's also kind of unfair if we just overlook the goodness that is inherent in his novels. Lastly, I would like to talk about the 3 strangers, because these 3 strangers are definitely some of the most enigmatic characters that have been written. The book never really makes it clear who these strangers really are. Someone has said before that these 3 strangers might just be, the 4 horsemen, with Cormac McCarthy being the 4th one. Another person also suggested the idea that these 3 strangers might not exactly be real characters. They might just be Kala's consciousness, kind of like his other personalities. But the way I see it, these 3 strangers actually remind me of Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men. They seem to be the embodiment of evil and chaos. And in my opinion, they're kind of like the perverted version of the Holy Trinity. If God is all good and all loving, these 3 strangers are the exact opposite. But there is something interesting about them that I want to talk about. But unfortunately, this will be a spoiler. But I really want to talk about it. So if you guys don't want to hear this part, you can just skip this part and just go straight into the last 2 sections of this video. But if you want to know what the spoiler is all about, well, you can definitely stay. And that's basically your spoiler warning. And here we go. So, unlike Anton Chigurh in No Country for Old Men, who tries to kill Llewellyn Moss, the main character of that novel, the 3 strangers in this novel don't kill Kala. At the end of the story, they actually let Kala live. But this kind of reminds me of the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. In it, the devil, Screwtape, the senior devil, says that death is kind of a liberation. Because when you die, you are basically beyond the reach of evil. At that point, it's really up to God. So as long as you are alive, the devil can mess you up. The devil can try to pull you further and further away from God. And that's what kind of happens in the novel. Although Kala lives, he's definitely a lost soul. But again, there's also a little bit of goodness even in the last part of the novel. So in the last part of the novel, Kala meets a blind person, and that blind person kind of try to make Kala understand, or at least be aware of his sins and become a better person. Although Kala doesn't really understand that. This probably means that although currently Kala's soul is damned, he is still not beyond God's grace. But then again, of course, it's really up to him whether he wants it or not. And yeah, those are basically the good things that I found from this novel. And right now, as always, don't forget to subscribe and turn on that notification bell on. And also like and share this video, especially if you like it. Thank you. Okay, so if Cormac McCarthy's prose in this novel is just top-notch, the dialogue are engaging, and the meaning is also beautiful, what does this book lack? Is there even anything that it lacks? In my opinion, there is. And it's the story. The premise of the novel is pretty intriguing, and I don't want to say that I hate the story as a whole, but it could definitely have been better, especially with Kala's story. Honestly, I was a little bored by his journey because throughout the entire novel, he seems to be aimless. You know, he's just a man with no direction. So most of the time, I was more interested in Rinthe's journey. Although I can understand why Kala's story is like that, still, I was a little bored by it. And lastly, the ending. Actually, only one of the main characters that has a climactic ending. As for the other one, that character's ending just happens. You know, that character's story just ends. And I was, slightly disappointed by it because I was expecting something so much more than just that. So yeah, those are basically the only two problems that I have with this novel. But really, at the end of the day, this is still a phenomenal novel and a haunting one. And although this novel is not perfect and is not my all-time favorite novel by Cormac McCarthy, this is still a great book. And because of that, I give this book a 4.5 out of 5. And yeah, this is basically the book that I would like to share with you guys today. So what do you think of it? Have you guys read this novel? Or have you read any novels by Cormac McCarthy? Or are you interested in any of his novels? Share your thoughts and opinions in the comments below and let me know. And oh yeah, also stay tuned for my next video, because in my next video, I'm going to do a big book haul. It seems that you guys really love book haul videos, because every time I make a book haul video, it always gets a lot of views. So yeah, stay tuned for that one. And with that, thank you for watching and staying, and also thank you for the support. My name is Dante. I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye.